Have you ever wondered, why me? What have I done to deserve this fate? Why I have to fight the hardest battles? Why I suffer the most? The answer is you are probably overreacting and or unlucky. Bad luck gets us all, and it's only natural that sometimes we get the short end of the stick. One day, fortune will smile at us all. But what if bad luck chose you specifically as its punching bag? What if universe did everything in its capacity to screw you over, your family, and memory of everything that's ever been associated with you? What if fortune looked at you and gagged in disgust? Well then, you'd probably be a Lamenter. Today, we'll dive into miserable existence of one of my favorite successor chapters of already quite unlucky lineage. I'm inviting you to take a closer look at what it really means to struggle, to get your head stomped into the dirt, and then ask for some more. Before talking about the genesis of our crying yellow babies, we have to understand how uncountable legions of space marines got chopped up into glorified battalions. After Horror's breakdown, consisting of crying and stomping and ruining the playground for everyone else, was stopped by the Emperor's deletion of this man-child, the Imperium was in ruins. Bright future and expansion got turned into grim darkness and life support. What concerned most of the ruling class was the question, how this shitstorm happened and how can we prevent it from storming shit again? One of the brightest of them all, creator of all the pivot tables that still work even after 10,000 years and countless interns who had overwritten the changes, Robute Gilliman had an idea. What if Horus, instead of hundreds of thousands of legionaries, had just 1,000? Surely you would have owned him sooner, right? Enter Codex Astartes, the big book that says heresy bad. That's how founding legions became first founding chapters, as a preventive measure from electric boogaloo happening ever again. And well, as first indicates, some more happened rather quickly. Around 6,000 years after the Horus heresy, we are at 21st founding, also called Cursed. The name, unfortunately, is not an overstatement. Adeptus Mechanicus was struck by brilliant idea. What if we took already fucked up idea of space marine creation and instead we made it worse? This had to be the brainstorm's final conclusion because I refuse to believe that any Magos with intelligence level above room temperature would think that meddling with already half-baked, unstable and unpredictable process that only one megalomaniac in the Milky Way understood completely would end with success. I guess on paper they tried to improve on Big E formula by removing certain genetic flaws, but as the cursed part of the nickname suggests, it was a complete failure. Between horrific mutations and traitors on traitors on traitors, this founding has gifted the humanity with Lamenters. At first glance, they seemed okay. No bone claws, no unholy flesh mutations, they even stayed loyal to the Imperium. Well, for the most of the time. Even the improvement seemed to work. At the beginning of their existence, they had none of the Blood Angel's genetic flaws, neither Red Thirst nor Black Rage. The operation was deemed a success, and another successor chapter got a pat on the back and off they went. The problem started almost at the beginning of Lamenter's never-ending crusade. First of all, 21st Founding was already a bit infamous after supplying traitor marines with sweet, fresh supply of brand new recruits. Pretty much every chapter created during that founding was a step away from being excommunicated, and well, the demeanor of Yellow Boys wasn't exactly helpful in denying these allegations. One of the first red flags indicating that something went really wrong in the gene seed upgrade domain was their melancholy. Blood Angels usually are not considered as cheerful chapter. After all, their defining trait is their gene father's galactic level whooping, which ended in generational level trauma. Lamenters, however, take the trauma to the whole new level. They are described as being constantly sad and stuck in their own heads. They are weeping for the lives lost, for betrayals and heresies they've endured. Even their chaplains, apart from serving as Galaxy's most pissed off babysitters, are performing official rituals of lamentation. Their melancholy is a physical feeling, like a gut punch from the Emperor himself. And to be completely honest, it's not necessarily clear if it's yet another bug in geneseed.exe, or is it a result of their bad relationship with 4chan, passed through generations, but they embrace it completely. The second red flag is way easier to identify, and that is previously mentioned legendary levels of bad luck. First instance where it became evident that the Lamenters really shouldn't try gambling was at the Hive World Gorilla. They were one of the 2 chapters that were assigned to defend the planet from Abaddon's 9th attempt at knocking at Emperor's doors. Well, they were one of the 2 chapters for about half a day, because as soon as Mortificators learned that their partners are the infamous Lamenters, they noped out of the sector, leaving the population and our sad yellow boys alone to fight against the whole Black Legion. This is the only instance that I know about of loyal servants of the Emperor leaving their comrades, not for the tactical advantage nor some higher objective, but just for the vibes alone. Lamenters, being gigachats they are, did not abandon the civilians and held the line for 6 fucking weeks. I don't know if holding the line is the correct term if the line is made of mounds of corpses of ex-defenders of said line. Their numbers had been reduced by 80%. I repeat, they lost 800 of 1,000 marines present in the whole chapter. Abaddon's lackeys were pushed back only after the atmosphere was filled with angry calculator noises and modified mufflers roaring in the background. Finally, Ultramarines and White Scars provided the unfortunate chapter with the support that has been denied by Mortificator's vibe check. Saved by not 1 but 2 first founding legions, enriched by first-hand combat experience with the main bad guys of the universe, the Lamenters left the segment in hopes of finding new recruits to soon be neophytes. Well, that was the plan. Quick explanation break. Long-distance interplanetary travel in 40k universe, from the humanity perspective, is something akin to Minecraft/Nether calculations. 1 block in the normal world equals 8 blocks in hell. Well, instead of making angular portals powered by zippo-lighters, 40k technology involves ripping a hole in the fabric of reality and then creating a bubble around the ship that keeps every horror beyond human comprehension away from said ship. There are a few issues with this foolproof idea, however. Firstly, you're still traveling through hell. Even the tiniest of issues with the bubble, or Gellar field in universe, can cause a full-on demon infestation that is impossible to patch up and clear. Secondly, the warp is hostile itself, so it's doing everything in its power to make the travel as problematic as possible. Onboard navigators, or mutants with Imperial seal of approval, are there to aim the ship as precisely as possible, but the final point of the travel is often wishful estimation instead of precise point on the map. Finally, the spatial situation is not the only thing that's the subject of eyeballing. Time itself does not exist in the warp. You can enter in 2026 and arrive at your destination in 2016, just in time to witness the point in the multiverse where everything got fucked up. Or in 2056, in which case you'll be finally able to play Half-Life 3. All the factors combined make the space travel one hell of a road trip. And for the Lamenters, everything went to shit at once. They entered the warp during a warp storm, an event that makes everything bad 10 times worse, and got lost for over a century. In standard non-hell time. How long it was for them? Only the Lamenters know. They got stuck in gigantic space coffins flying through hell itself, defending themselves against an unending tide of previously mentioned horrors beyond human comprehension. And somehow, they still survived. Depleted, destroyed, battered, and for sure PTSD'd into oblivion, they came back from the Immaterium swinging. This time, they got some well-needed respite. Once again at full strength, the Lamenters got sent to the galaxy's fringes, the Maelstrom Zone. They were supposed to be first line of defense against any chaos threats, or to simply serve as bodyguards to any rogue traders' caravans in the area. After Mortificators left them on red, the warmth they had received from Astral Claws was a pleasant change. Together, They protected the Imperium under glorious leadership of noble chapter masters Malakim Pharos and Luft Huron. Yes, that one. You see where this is going, don't you? Before the Great Tax War began, the Lamenters had one more notable feat that strained their lack of luck to godly levels. During their Border Patrol era, they had received a warp fax from none other than Chapter Master Marnius Calgar, who's been calling for aid to eradicate yet another British green-skinned hooligan band. The Lamenters felt obliged to reply. After all, they didn't forget about Ultramarines saving their sorry asses after they got ghosted by mortificators. So they packed their yellow backpacks and speeded right through the Corinth sector. That's how they arrived in the orbit of heavenly, agreeable, maiden agri world called Slaughterhouse 3. At this moment, it was well-known orc fortress / mining world, and even Calgar wasn't sure that storming it headfirst was a resolute action. Lamenters chose the back door and swiftly infiltrated the orc lines. It sounds more impressive than it actually is, but to be honest, you don't have to be Alpha Legionary to fool these half-brained morons. On the surface, they ripped apart any orbital defenses and mopped the floor with remaining orcs. Finally, swift, decisive win for Sad Boys. The victory was not so final due to few factors. This absolute shithole of a planet was in the middle of orc territory, and green, mad, and frenzied reinforcements were already on their way. Well then, let's just pack all the civilian hostages on some space shuttle or something and be a hero somewhere else, one may think. The Lamenters certainly thought so too. The only teeny tiny little hole in this foolproof plan was the fact that there was a metric gazillion of hostages on the planet, few million at least. Lamenters had two choices: to pull a Mortificator's power move on them and use them as bait to swiftly get out of the danger zone, or try to take as many of them as humanly possible while constantly fighting off the unending green tide. You probably guessed which option the yellow chats had chosen. Less than 200 Space Marines held off an impossible amount of orcs, while their tech marines hotwired orc transporters just to evacuate as many civilians as they could. You thought the situation was already unwinnable? Okay then, what if the Genseed modification that stopped the Black Rage decided that it was its moment to fuck off and leave? That's right, the Black Rage is back on the menu, boys. Left and right, the Lamenters fell to the floor and started screaming nonsense about their brother taking away their favorite toy and kicking their dad in the balls or something. Not even close to having enough transports to save all civilians, Death Company in making, and Green Tide getting a better hold on the planet each passing second, Lamenters had to make train lever type choice. Battle Brothers that were already on the battle barge were good to go, while the ones still on the slaughterhouse decided to respect the reasonable favor the population asked. They've rigged the whole planet with seismic explosives and kindly asked the Lamenters to pull the switch. After all, it's better to die a free man rather than an orc slave, and for the second time nonetheless. And so, the Lamenters, through pouring tears, obliged. The Slaughterhouse 3 was no more, and more than 2 million civilians went with it. They've saved shit ton of people, don't get me wrong, but for the Masters of Melancholy, it was an astronomical failure. They couldn't save them all, and even worse, they had to be the ones to pull the trigger on the Emperor's mercy. From the Ultramarines' point of view, however, it was a stunning success. Tactically crucial orc mining world stuffed to the brim with orbital defense guns, atomized. Large amount of civilians, saved. Some Lamenters, still alive. Our favorite toilet dweller was so impressed, in fact, that he decided to reward the melancholic maniacs with one of the highest tokens of approval, the Iron Halo. Lamenters, being Lamenters, refused to accept such an honorable gift. They simply thought they didn't deserve it after killing few million civilians. From Ultramarines' perspective, however, this gratitude has been met with unimaginable level of disrespect. Their departure was not friendly, to say the least, and the cursed founding allegations had only been strengthened. And now we can finally talk about the Great Tax Wars. Slaughterhouse liberated. Local population failed. Blueberries agitated. The last thing on the unlucky checklist left was choosing the worst side in a secessionist conflict. But how did it all happen? Well, being stuck in the fringes of Imperium, constantly at war with some another unholy creation of the warp, the last thing Huron's forces needed was the influence of some Imperial paper pushers. Astral Claws felt like their independence as Space Marine chapter was constantly choked by yet another quota, another tax, another delayed supply transport, and another meaningless objective. So they did what Space Marines do best. They rebelled against the rotting corpse of an empire that created them. Lamenters felt like the reasoning behind Huron's forces' rebellion was solid. And they were besties. They had to support each other, right? Surely the departure from the Imperial jurisdiction had nothing to do with constant warp exposure and being stationed for centuries at the gates of hell. And for sure, the so-called demonic whispers mumbled right into Huron's ear must have just been the wind. So you can probably guess what was the general Imperial reaction after hearing that their border patrol decided to form their own independent planet cluster. Yeah, the Badab Wars began. For the Lamenters, this conflict wasn't as long as for Astral Claws. Being fleet-based chapter, they concentrated their efforts on being a pain in the ass for every caravan in the sector, constantly harassing and blocking every possible Imperial transport. And that worked for them, well, until the High Lords of Terra lapdogs had arrived. As soon as Minotaurs had sniffed the Lamenters, they had chosen them as their personal punching bags. They didn't expect, however, the punching bag to punch back. Lamenters' only battle barge got immobilized and boarded. Deadly close quarters battle commenced, and for the whole day, two chapters obliterated each other. The Minotaurs won by throwing one battle brother after another, not caring for losses. They literally choked Lamenters with bodies. Our yellow sad boys had two choices: fight till the last one, losing all hopes of preserving their unholy meatball deposit, and in consequence, eradicating their whole chapter from Imperial history. Or, well, surrender. They chose the latter. Minotaurs took the spoils of war, replacing their destroyed toys with anything that had Lamenters' emblem on it, and the Lamenters were kindly escorted to the Holy Terra for trial. According to everything we know about 40k, High Lords of Terra, and Inquisition and all, the Lamenters should receive the blindfold last cigarette type treatment. Well, that would be the lucky and merciful ending for them. Instead, by some miracle, the Council of Geriatric Imperial Leaders decided that Lamenters had one last chance to prove their loyalty, so they've sent them to a penitent crusade, during which disgraced chapter could not recruit any new neophytes. Let's get this straight. After being battered by orcs and hoplite wannabes, they could not get any new members for 100 years straight. That's what I meant by merciful ending. Any encounter could potentially end their chapter. And oh boy, encounter they've got. The first enemy they've crossed path with was not some handicapped chaos cult or lost Drukhari murder party. They've stumbled directly into the maw of fucking High Fleet Kraken. Some details of this encounter can be experienced in Dan Abnett's short story Fall of Malvalion or something. It's around 15 pages long and perfectly describes what it's like to be on a receiving end of Capillary Tower. Excellent body horror. Abnett flawlessly succeeded in making Tyrannid scary. Our yellow boys are in it for really short time, which greatly summarizes their situation at the end of Second Tyrannic War. After 39 minutes since the last of them exited the drop pod, they all get slaughtered. Heads go off, Space Marines melt, and Lamenters are reduced to nothing more than few companies. They got their asses handed to them so hard that they refused to help during devastation of Baal. They were so busy getting ripped apart by another High Fleet that saving Dat's hometown was not their top priority. Maybe it was for the better. Defense of Baal was a close call without them either way. And that's all for Yellow Boy's most notable encounters. As you can see, bad luck follows them everywhere they go. But what's best about it, they always, somehow, manage to cling to life. the number of times they were reduced to nothing more than humble warband is higher than their successful campaigns, and yet still they do what their father did best: die tragically. Literature containing their painful shenanigans, unfortunately, isn't plentiful. Apart from Abnett's short story, there's that Deathwatch series with depressed Dreadnought who thinks he's the only one left, but I can't recommend it to you because, well, I haven't read it yet. There's also a brand new short story, Tears of Rafaela, which is simply fantastic. It provides us with more lore for the chapter than any previous Imperial Armor or Blood Angels Codex combined. We have rituals, current state of their penitent crusade, and even a confirmation of what chapter master is up to. He's been, well, presumed dead since Badab Wars. It's also depressing as fuck, while still having some humorous jabs at the whole unlucky fiasco. If you have an hour to spare, go read these two short stories. And if you had some experience with the Deathwatch series, hit me up in the comments and tell us all what you think about it. Maybe it's worth a read. After getting to know this absolute clusterfuck of a chapter, I'd like to share with you quite a personal story. When I started getting into collecting and painting minis, I decided to go with Space Marines, as any sane and not so artsy talented person should. I've immediately got hooked on Blood Angels lore, and as you could hear in my previous video, I love them with my whole heart. I'm a fanboy through and through. But I've decided to dig deeper, to find something that resonates with me on cellular level. And I found them. Saddest of sad boys, unluckiest of unlucky. With Joji on my headphones, therapy in progress, and edgelord grudge against the world, I felt such a personal connection with the idea of being so unlucky that is comedic that I've made a split-second decision and chose them as my first ever chapter. As I've soon discovered, this was absolutely one of the worst ideas I've ever undertaken. Painting yellow is hard. Making it look kinda aesthetically pleasing is a dark magic I've never understood. And I really was trying. What was the worst part in that damnable color was its reaction to null oil, the substance of God's blessed be its name. Right now, I gaslight myself into thinking that I can, in fact, paint something slightly pleasing to the eye, but it's mostly due to the fact that I just dip every mini in a bucket full of null oil and call it a day. But yellow, oh yellow, it cooperates with null oil as well as Lamenter does with Russian roulette. The slight amount of the shade of guts on anything other than the deepest, blackest hole of a mini makes it look like it was dropped down the shitter and taken on the other side of the sewer. But what hit me the most was this damn emblem. Imagine painting your first or third or even 10th mini and deciding, yes, freehanding this checkerboard and circle with a heart is actually in my reach. Just you wait. When I was trying to constantly repaint my fuck-ups, I've created so many Lawrences that no amount of Imani's love could ever accommodate. I've used unholy amounts of isopropyl alcohol, which fumes had for sure shortened my life expectancy by decades. But you know what? It all paid off. Once I've stepped out of the lamenting corner and tried to paint some Blood Angels, it instantly clicked. Every failed take on Sad Boys paid off, and my minis started to look somewhat acceptable. I've started to see a glimmer of fun in this hobby. In a way, Lamenters taught me how to struggle successfully, how to force through the rainiest of days. Now, I look fondly on my isopropyl-induced highs, and I think to myself, damn, that was a ride. Recently, I've even tried to paint some more Lamenters. They still look like shit, but the lessons learned won't leave me anytime soon. There's a beauty in the struggle, and sooner or later, it will pay off. So, keep on struggling, my dear viewers, all two of you. See you sometime soon, and thank you for sticking to the end. See ya. Bye.